The Black Mill of Durnholde. Part 1. The road to Durnholde was wrong long before the village appeared. The trees leaning inward as if listening, their branches tangled like fingers that had forgotten how to let go. And the wind did not move them. It only slipped between them and vanished, swallowed by something deeper than forest and older than the path beneath Ronan Raven's boots. He walked alone, cloak heavy with damp, the leather of his gloves creaking softly each time his hand brushed the hilt at his side. Not from fear, not yet, but from memory, because places like this did not begin with death. They ended with it, and whatever waited ahead had already chosen its ending. There were no birds, no insects. Even the mud held no tracks. Not of hoof, not of man, not of anything that should have passed through a road that still remembered being used. And that absence pressed harder than any sound could. A silence that watched him approach as if measuring him for something. He saw the mill before he saw the village. It rose crooked against the gray sky, its broken sails hanging like torn limbs, unmoving, yet the structure itself seemed to breathe in slow, patient intervals, wood settling, beams shifting, a low, almost human groan threading through the air. Each time the wind touched it and recoiled, no river ran beneath it. The channel was dry, choked with blackened stones and something darker that clung to them like old rot, thick and dull, as if the ground itself had bled and then forgotten how to heal. Ronan stopped at the edge of the clearing and watched, counted the seconds between each sound. 1, 2, 3. The mill answered on the fourth, a deep internal turn, as though something inside was still working, still grinding, long after it should have died. Only then did he look to the village. Durnholde had not been burned. That would have been mercy. The houses stood as they had been left, doors ajar, shutters hanging loose. Tools scattered in yards where no one had returned to gather them. A cart lay overturned near the well, one wheel slowly rocking, though there was no wind to move it. The motion small, stubborn, repeating, like a breath that refused to stop. He stepped closer, boots sinking slightly into earth that was too soft for a place without rain, and the smell found him fully now. Not just rot, not just damp wood, but something sweet beneath it, heavy and clinging. The scent of opened flesh left too long in the dark. He did not flinch. He let it settle, let it tell its story. There were no bodies in the open. That was the second wrong thing. The third came when he saw the marks. Near the well, cut into the wood of the cart. Deep, deliberate. Not claw, not blade. Something in between. Lines too uneven to be steel, too precise to be teeth. Carving downward in long strokes that ended in splintered bursts. As if whatever had made them had not cared for the surface, only for what lay beneath it. He knelt, gloved fingers tracing the edge without touching the center, and felt the faint vibration there, a memory in the grain, a pressure that had not fully left, not old, not ancient, recent enough that the wood still remembered the force. He straightened slowly and turned his head toward the mill again. The sound came back, closer this time, not from outside, from within. A rotation, a grind, a wet resistance followed by a dull release, over and over, patient, tireless, wrong, the kind of rhythm that belonged to work, to purpose, to something that did not question what it was made to do. Ronan exhaled once, slow, steady, and began to walk. Each step toward the mill thickened the air. The ground darkened, patches of soil giving way to something matted and fibrous that clung to his boots and stretched slightly before snapping back, threads breaking with soft, sticky sounds. He did not look down again. He did not need to. The smell was stronger here, sharper. And the sweetness beneath it was no longer hidden. It coated the back of his throat, turned each breath into something he had to choose to take. The door of the mill hung open, one hinge torn, the wood bowed inward as if it had been pushed from within too many times to remember its original shape. He stopped at the threshold, listened. The grinding continued. Slow, measured, alive. No voices, no movement beyond that endless turn. He reached up and pushed the door the rest of the way. It gave with a long, splintering sigh, dragging across the floor and leaving a dark smear behind it, thick and uneven, catching on the grooves worn into the wood by years of use that had not ended when they should have. The interior was dim, light slipping through gaps in the walls in thin, pale lines that cut across the space and vanished before reaching the center, swallowed by shadow that seemed too dense, too complete, as if it held weight. The millstone was moving slowly, steadily, turning against nothing. No grain fed it, no sacks lay open nearby. The hopper above it was empty, its wooden side stained dark, the edges worn smooth by hands that were no longer there. Yet the stone turned, grinding against its pair with a sound that was not dry, not clean, but damp, resistant, as though something soft and yielding passed between them each time they met. Ronan stepped inside, the floor answering with a low creak beneath his weight, and the door behind him shifted slightly, not closing, just enough to narrow the line of gray light that connected the inside to the world he had come from. He did not look back. His gaze moved across the room, taking in what mattered. The walls were marked, not scratched, pressed, smeared, patterns where something had been dragged and lifted again, leaving behind trails that led to the stone, old, over new, each darker than the last, until the wood beneath them had lost its color entirely. And then he saw it, beneath the turning wheel. Something caught between the stones, something that should have been ground to nothing long ago, but wasn't. It moved just slightly, resisting, enduring, and with each slow turn of the mill, it bled. Ronan did not step back when it moved. He stepped closer, slow and measured, aligning his breath with the grinding rhythm of the stone, as if learning the pulse of something still alive within it. Because the thing caught between the millstones was not dying. It endured, it resisted, and that alone meant it was being kept that way. The mass shifted again, a wet tightening under pressure, and this time a sound escaped it. Not a scream, but a crushed exhale forced through something that still remembered how to breathe. Ronan's hand settled on his sword, but he did not draw yet. Not until he understood what he was facing. Not until he saw where the life truly was, because the stone was only the mouth, not the mind. The grinding turned again, and the thing dragged outward slightly before being pulled back. Not randomly, not blindly, but guided, controlled, as if something deeper inside the mill decided how much of it was allowed to surface. A strip of slick, dark flesh caught the dim light and vanished again. Ronan shifted his position and circled the mechanism, eyes scanning the structure, the beams, the empty hopper. And then he saw them, the cords, stretched from the upper frame down into the heart of the machine, trembling with each rotation, tightening and loosening in a rhythm that did not belong to wood or iron. He moved closer, stopping just short of touching one. The smell here was sharper, metallic beneath the rot, and the cord twitched again as the stone turned. Ronan leaned in and saw the truth in the thin gray light. The surface was not rope, it was layered, uneven, pale in stretched places, darker in others, and along it ran a crude seam that opened slightly with tension, revealing wet red beneath. Not fiber, not hemp, but sinew, living, flexing, reacting, multiple lengths of it feeding into the machine, guiding the motion instead of being dragged by it. Ronan straightened slowly, understanding, settling cold and immediate. The mill was not broken. It had been remade, rebuilt with flesh where wood had failed, sustained by something that refused to stop working. The stone shifted again, and the mass beneath it pushed harder this time, breaking the rhythm for a brief moment, enough for shape to form, a bend like an arm, a curve like a shoulder, but wrong, layered, fused, multiple bodies pressed together into something that no longer had a single form, skin against skin, muscle torn and merged, and yet it moved with purpose, not in panic, but in control, as if it knew the limits of the pressure and how far it could resist. Before being pulled back in, Ronan's grip tightened, but he still did not strike, because the movement told him what mattered. This was not prey trapped in a machine. This was part of it. Then a sound came from above, soft, wet, almost hidden beneath the grinding. Ronan's gaze lifted slowly to the darkness above the beams where the cords disappeared. Something shifted there, not fully visible, but heavy, present. The cords reacted instantly, all of them pulling tight at once, and the millstone responded, its rhythm changing slightly faster, slightly stronger, enough to force a low, broken scream from the mass below before crushing it back into silence. Ronan's jaw set. This was not chaos, not feeding. This was a system, controlled, deliberate, something that used bodies, not just consumed them, something that kept them alive just enough to keep working. A drop fell from one of the cords, thick and dark, landing near his boot and spreading slowly, too slowly, as if it resisted becoming still. Ronan did not look down for long. His attention returned upward, because the presence above had shifted again, and now he could hear it clearly, a wet intake of breath that did not match the rhythm below, something breathing where nothing should be, something watching him without eyes, weighing him, measuring him, deciding. Ronan's hand closed fully around the hilt, and this time he drew the blade. The sound of steel cut through the mill like a final answer, sharp and clean against the wet grinding. The cord snapped tight in response. The stone jolted for the first time, stuttering before forcing itself back into motion. Resistance pushing against it from within, Ronan stepped forward, not toward the stone, but toward the shadow above it, blade angled, body ready, and spoke low, steady. "Come down." The words barely carried, swallowed by the sound around him. For a moment nothing changed. Then the cords began to lower, slowly, together, and something came with them. Something heavy, something that had been waiting. The cords lowered in unison, and with them the weight above began to take shape, piece by piece, through the suffocating dark. First, a slick, pale length, then a warped curve that might once have been a torso, then something like a head stretched beyond memory of bone. And Ronan did not move, blade steady, eyes fixed upward, because the truth was not in how it looked, but in how it controlled its descent. It did not fall. It fed itself downward, each cord flexing like muscle, not restraint, but extension, guiding its own body into the open space of the mill. The grinding below slowed as if resisting the shift, the mass between the stones pushing outward in response, reacting to the presence above like a limb responding to its master. And then the illusion broke, because it was not hanging from the cords. It was the cords. The entire thing woven from layered sinew stretched across the beams. The descending mass only the densest knot of it, a core built from fused flesh, faces pressed into its surface, mouths half-formed, eyes sealed, remnants of those who had been fed into it and never allowed to finish dying. One of the mouths opened slowly as it lowered, not speaking, just remembering the motion. And then it stopped, suspended between ceiling and floor, watching without eyes, the cords tightening around it, adjusting tension, redistributing weight. The millstone below grinding harder again as if empowered, and the trapped mass beneath it surged violently, a hand forcing itself partially free, fingers stripped to bone, reaching blindly before being dragged back in and crushed with a wet final collapse. Ronan did not look at it. His attention remained fixed above, because that was where the will lived. The creature shifted along the beams without sound, cords sliding, tightening, repositioning, the core rotating slightly as if testing him, studying, not rushing, not wasting movement. And that made it worse, because this was not hunger. This was understanding. Ronan adjusted his stance, blade angled, waiting, because the first strike would not be his, and it came fast, a cord snapping downward with unnatural speed. He stepped inside its path and cut upward, steel biting into living sinew with resistance that bent rather than broke. The cord recoiled instantly, splitting, but not severed, pulling itself back into the mass, healing as it withdrew. Ronan reset, eyes narrowing, learning it could be cut, but not easily, not in a single motion. The creature responded not with pain, but with adaptation. More cords moving at once, overlapping strikes descending in patterns meant to predict his movement, to trap him in decisions. Ronan moved through them with precision, minimal steps, controlled turns, intercepting only what he had to, reading the delay between motion above and force below, mapping the rhythm even as it changed. One cord slipped past his guard and wrapped his forearm, tightening instantly with crushing force. Ronan reacted without hesitation, shifting grip and driving the blade down into it, not slicing, but piercing, deep and twisting. The cord convulsed, tightened, once more, then released, snapping back upward and dragging torn strands into itself, reabsorbing the damage it learned, and so did he. The creature lowered further, closer now, the core fully visible, surface constantly shifting with trapped forms pressing and fading, and within it something darker pulsed irregularly, deeper than the rest. Where all cords converged, Ronan saw it and understood without doubt. That was the center. That was where it ended. The cords lashed again, faster, closer. Ronan moved forward this time, closing distance instead of giving it, cutting one aside, slipping beneath another, letting a third tear across his shoulder without stopping. Pain sharp and irrelevant. Focus, locked on the core. The creature reacted instantly, pulling upward slightly, retreating just enough to deny him reach. It would not let him close easily, which meant it feared that distance. Ronan slowed, then shifted rhythm unpredictably, breaking the pattern it had begun to read, forcing hesitation. And for the first time it paused, only a fraction, but enough. He stepped through the opening, blade rising, distance collapsing. And the creature answered not by retreating but by committing. The entire mass dropping at once, cords snapping tight, the mill screaming around them as wood and flesh strained together. And the system broke its own rhythm to kill him. It came down with full weight, not a strike, but a collapse. The entire mass dropping as one, cords snapping tight, and driving force through every strand, the air itself compressing as it descended. And Ronan did not retreat. He stepped into it, because distance was death here, and closeness was the only place it lost control. The impact shattered the rhythm of the mill. Wood cracked, beams groaned. The grinding stone lurched violently as the tension above shifted all at once. The trapped mass beneath it screamed again, louder this time, a raw, tearing sound that echoed through the structure as pressure changed and then surged back harder, compensating, correcting. The system trying to maintain itself even as it attacked. Ronan moved through the falling cords, not away, but inside the collapse, blade tight to his body, shoulders turning just enough to let the first strike glance past him. The second he caught and redirected. The third wrapped his leg and tightened instantly, dragging him off balance. But he used it, dropping with the pull instead of resisting, driving himself forward beneath the descending core, closer than the creature expected, closer than it wanted. And for the first time, the cords hesitated in their tightening, a fraction of confusion as the distance vanished. The core loomed above him now, close enough that he could see the layers shifting in detail, faces pressing outward in silent distortion, mouths opening in reflex, not screaming, not speaking, just repeating the last motion they remembered. The dark pulse at the center throbbing irregularly, not like a heart, but like something forced to function. Ronan drove his blade upward, not in a wide arc, but in a short, brutal thrust aimed directly at that pulsing core. The steel met resistance immediately, not hard like bone, not soft like flesh. Something in between, dense, layered, the blade sinking in but not cleanly. The creature reacted instantly, every cord tightening at once, the one around his leg jerking hard, pulling him sideways, others snapping down toward his arms and shoulders, trying to bind, to tear him away before the strike could deepen. Ronan did not pull the blade free. He pushed harder, forcing it in another inch, twisting as he drove. And the core responded with a violent convulsion that rippled through the entire structure. The mill screamed around them, beams cracking, dust falling, the grinding stone below stuttering violently as the tension feeding it faltered for the first time. The cords lashed in frenzy now, no longer measured, no longer precise, striking in overlapping chaos, trying to overwhelm him with force instead of control. One caught his shoulder and tore through cloth and skin. Another wrapped his side and tightened enough to crush breath from his lungs. But still he held the blade in, refusing to release it. Because this was the moment. This was the only opening it would give. The core pulsed harder, faster, erratic now, leaking dark fluid around the steel, thick and hot. The faces along the surface began to move more violently, mouths stretching wider, eyes forcing open where there had been none. Not alive, not conscious, but reacting. The entire mass destabilizing as the central structure failed to maintain its pattern. Ronan shifted his grip and wrenched the blade sideways, tearing instead of cutting, widening the wound in a brutal motion that broke whatever cohesion held the layers together. and the creature made a sound. Then, not from any single mouth, but from all of them at once, a deep, layered rupture of noise that filled the mill and drowned out the grinding below. The cord around his leg snapped tighter in response, lifting him partially from the ground, trying to pull him free, to tear him away from the wound. Others followed, binding his arm, his torso, dragging him back inch by inch, and the blade began to slip from the core as the pressure shifted against it. Ronan released it for a fraction of a second, just enough to change his angle, then drove it back in deeper, both hands on the hilt now, forcing all his weight into the strike, ignoring the cords cutting into him, ignoring the pull, the pain, the suffocation building in his chest. Because the core was breaking, he could feel it, the resistance changing, not pushing back with strength now, but collapsing inward, losing structure, the pulse faltering, stuttering, failing. The millstone below stopped, not gradually, all at once. The grinding ceased mid-turn, the sound cutting off so abruptly it left a void in its place, and in that silence the entire structure seemed to hold its breath. The cords froze for a fraction of a second. Tension locked, the creature suspended between collapse and recovery. And Ronan used that moment. He twisted the blade again and ripped downward, carving through the weakened core in a single, brutal motion, tearing it open instead of piercing it, splitting the center that held everything together. The effect was immediate. The cords lost tension. Not all at once, but in a rapid cascade, each strand slackening, twitching, failing, as the signal from the core broke apart. The one around his leg loosened just enough for him to drop, hitting the floor hard, rolling to absorb the impact as the mass above convulsed violently. The fused bodies along its surface collapsing inward, losing shape, the faces distorting and sinking as the structure that held them together gave way. The creature tried to pull itself back up, cords retracting unevenly, dragging its own weight across the beams. But without the core's control, the movement was erratic, uncoordinated, strands tangling, tightening in the wrong places, snapping in others. Ronan pushed himself up, breathing hard now, blood running from his shoulder and side, but still moving, still focused, because it was not dead yet. The core still pulsed, weak, broken, but not gone. He saw it through the torn mass, deeper now, exposed, the dark center flickering like something struggling to stay lit. And the creature felt his gaze, reacted, cords lashing out again in desperate, uneven strikes. Slower now, less precise, but still dangerous, still capable of killing him. If he misstepped even once, Ronan moved through them again. But this time he did not test. He did not measure. He committed, stepping through the chaos, taking one strike across his ribs, another tearing into his arm, ignoring both, closing the final distance as the mass above sagged and writhed. And when he reached the core again, he did not aim for precision. He drove the blade straight into it and did not stop, pushing until the hilt met flesh, until the resistance vanished entirely and the steel passed through what remained of its center. The pulse stopped. Everything stopped. For a single suspended moment, the entire mill hung in silence. Then it began to fall apart. The silence did not last. It broke like something thin stretched too far, the moment snapping as the structure above gave way, cords losing all cohesion at once, not retracting now but collapsing, dropping in heavy, wet lengths that struck the floor with dull impacts, dragging fragments of the mass down with them. The core no longer pulsed, not even weakly. It was still, split open around the blade buried inside it, and for a heartbeat, the entire mill seemed to sag around that stillness, as if it had been held together by nothing else. Then the beams cracked, sharp and final, one after another, the weight above shifting uncontrollably. Ronan moved without hesitation, wrenching the blade free as the dead flesh around it tore open easily now. No resistance left, only collapse. He stepped back as a length of sinew slammed into the floor where he had stood, the impact sending a wet spray across the boards, thick and dark, the smell changing instantly, the sweetness vanishing, replaced by something sour and empty, like rot that had finally been allowed to finish. The mass above continued to fall apart, sections tearing loose, dragging others with them, the fused bodies losing shape entirely, separating not into individuals, but into unrecognizable ruin. Flesh that no longer held form, no longer moved with purpose. The millstone shifted again, but not with force, not with intent. It sagged slightly off its axis as the tension that had driven it disappeared. The upper stone grinding a final fraction of a turn before settling unevenly. And beneath it, the mass that had been caught there slid outward, no longer resisting, no longer pushing back. It spilled onto the floor in slow, heavy folds, spreading into something that had once been many and was now nothing. Ronan did not look at it for long. He did not need to. Whatever had been kept alive there was gone. Whatever had endured had been ended, and the cost of that endurance lay silent and broken. At his feet, he turned instead toward the failing structure above. Because the danger had not fully passed, the beams continued to crack, the supports shifting as the weight redistributed without control. The cords that still hung from them twitched weakly, not alive, not controlled, just remnants of motion fading out. A section of the upper frame gave way completely, collapsing inward with a heavy crash that shook the entire mill, dust and splinters falling in a choking cloud. Ronan stepped through it, moving toward the door, not running, not rushing, but not slowing either. His breathing heavy now, controlled but strained, blood still running down his arm and side, each step leaving a dark mark on the wood behind him, the floor beneath his boots slick with what remained of the creature. The exit narrowing as the warped door shifted further inward under the stress of the collapsing frame. He reached it, just as another beam cracked above, dropping behind him with a force that sent a shock through the ground. He did not turn to watch. He pushed through the opening, shoulder hitting the wood hard enough to force it aside, and stepped out into the gray light beyond. The air outside was colder, cleaner, but not right. He stopped just beyond the threshold and turned back once, not out of doubt, not out of fear, but to confirm what he already knew. The mill was folding in on itself, the roof sagging, the broken sails shifting as the internal structure failed. The sound of collapse deep and final, not violent now, but inevitable, like something that had been held together too long, finally being allowed to end. The dark channel beneath it remained still, no water returning, no movement reclaiming what had been taken, only silence spreading outward from the ruin as the last of the structure gave way and settled into itself. Ronan stood there for a moment longer, blade still in his hand, the edge dark, not shining, not clean. He wiped it once against what remained of his cloak and slid it back into the scabbard without ceremony. His gaze moved across the village, the empty houses, the open doors, the still well. Nothing had changed there. Nothing had returned. Whatever had fed the mill had been taken completely, used, remade, and now it was gone, leaving nothing behind to reclaim what had been lost. No voices, no movement, no survivors. He turned away. The road waited, the same as before, silent, watching. He stepped onto it without looking back again, each step steady despite the weight of blood and fatigue pulling at him. The forest ahead, just as still, just as wrong. But now it felt different. Not alive with something hidden, but emptied, as if a presence had been removed and left a hollow in its place. The wind moved again, faint, uncertain, touching the branches that had not moved before, and for a moment it carried no smell at all. Behind him, the mill of Durnholde collapsed fully, and nothing came out of it.